He didn't know her name. She didn't ask for help. But when a struggling single dad found a starving pregnant woman asleep in his barn, a quiet act of kindness would awaken a miracle. Neither of them saw coming. If you believe in second chances, in love, found where no one's looking, and in the quiet power of goodness, stay with us. And if stories like this touch your heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more. Now let the story begin. The wind had changed. Cal Weston knew it the moment he stepped onto the creaking porch of his Pennsylvania farmhouse. Autumn had a sound, a scent crisp, bittersweet, full of endings, and today it arrived with force. Leaves spun in gold and copper flurries down the gravel path, the maple trees shedding their summer coats, like stories too heavy to hold. It was the kind of afternoon where the world turned quiet, and memories spoke louder than any voice. Cal wasn't a man who listened to memories anymore. He adjusted the strap of the canvas bag slung over his shoulder, filled with tools for repairing the warped barn door, and whistled once for Ginger, the orange tabby who usually trailed behind him like a shadow. No answer. The cat had a knack for disappearing in foul weather. He figured she was under the porch, curled up in a forgotten flower pot riding out the gusts. The barn stood at the edge of his property. Its roofline bowed slightly like an old man waiting out time. The boards groaned as he approached a soft creaking that might have once unnerved him, back when silence still made him uneasy. These days, silence was comfort. Predictable contained, but today wasn't predictable. As he stepped inside the barn, the heavy door protesting on its hinges, Cal froze. There, between two stacks of hay bales, was a figure curled motionless and heartbreakingly small. A woman, her coat was too thin for the wind, outside her boots caked in dry mud, her arms wrapped around her belly in a gesture so primal and protective, it sent a jolt through him. For a heartbeat, he thought she might be dead. But then she stirred just slightly, her head lolling her lips, parted in shallow breath. "Hey," he said, softly crouching. "Hey, can you hear me?" Her eyes blinked open blue-gray like overcast skies rimmed in red and fatigue. She flinched at the sight of him trying to push herself upright, but her strength betrayed her. "It's all right," Cal murmured, holding his hands where she could see them. "I'm not gonna hurt you. My name's Cal. You're on my property." She glanced around as if only now realizing where she was. Her voice, when it came, was barely more than a rasp. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to trespass. I couldn't walk anymore. You're pregnant." It wasn't a question. She nodded, wincing 7 months. Cal hesitated for just a second. He had rules, boundaries, a whole life built around keeping people out, and the ghosts in. But this woman wasn't a ghost. She was real, and she was freezing, and something in him, something long dormant, stirred at the sight of her. "Come on," he said, standing. "Let's get you inside." "I can't pay you," she whispered. "I didn't ask." Maisie was sitting on the living room floor with her picture books when Cal opened the door and led the woman inside. She looked up, curious, but not frightened, just quiet the way she always was since her mother died. "This is—" Cal paused. "What's your name, Evie?" the woman said faintly. "This is Evie. She's going to stay with us tonight. She's not feeling well." Maisie nodded solemnly, then stood and offered Evie her favorite blanket, the one with faded stars and edges frayed from years of use. Evie's eyes welled up. "Thank you," she murmured. Cal helped her onto the couch near the fire, fetched a cup of warm cider, and turned on the old electric heater. Evie leaned back, eyes closing the tension in her shoulders, slowly easing. "Do you have anyone we can call?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, it's just me." He didn't ask for more. He didn't need to. That night, Long after Maisie had gone to bed and the house had quieted to the ticking of the kitchen clock, Cal stood by the window, looking out at the barn. It was dark now, just a silhouette against the starlit sky. He remembered the way Evie's hands had trembled, the way she'd gripped her belly, whispering something he couldn't quite hear. He didn't believe in signs, not anymore. But something about today, about her, refused to fade. He poured himself a cup of black coffee he didn't need and sat at the old oak table. For the first time in a long time, he felt the quiet wasn't pressing in. It was waiting, as if the house too was holding its breath. Behind him, he heard the faintest sound, a soft content. Sigh Evie asleep on the couch, Ginger curled at her feet, and for the first time in years, Cal Weston felt something shift in the silence. Not fear, not sorrow. Something closer to beginning. Morning arrived with the hush of falling leaves, the kind of quiet that clung to everything like a wool blanket. Cal Weston stirred in his bed just before sunrise. Same as always, old habits. Military or not, rarely died. He slipped into his boots, padded down the hallway, and stopped short at the sight of the living room. Evie was already awake, seated cross-legged on the couch, with her belly gently rising beneath a knitted throw. The room was still cloaked in dawn shadow, but a soft lamplight cast a golden hue across her tired face. Her hands were wrapped around a steaming mug, not his usual chipped one, but a sunflower-painted cup that had once belonged to his late wife. Cal froze. That mug hadn't been used since the funeral. Evie looked up. I hope it's all right. I couldn't sleep much, and I saw the tea bags on the shelf. She hesitated, eyes flicking toward the cup. It was the only clean one I could reach. Cal nodded slowly. It's fine. But something inside him shifted quiet and brittle. He wasn't upset. Not really, just disarmed. As if she'd opened a door he'd nailed shut long ago and didn't even know she had. Maisie came padding into the room moments later, dragging her blanket behind her curls, a tangled halo. She rubbed her eyes and crawled up next to her father on the armchair. Her eyes locking on Evie, with a gaze full of quiet curiosity. "Morning, sweet girl," Evie said gently. Maisie didn't respond with words. She never did not right away, but she didn't hide behind her father either. Instead, she sat up straighter, then reached across the cushion to offer Evie her stuffed rabbit, whose ears were nearly threadbare. Evie blinked, clearly touched. "Thank you, Maisie. That's very kind." Cal glanced down at his daughter, surprised. Maisie didn't offer that rabbit to just anyone. "I was thinking of making pancakes," Cal offered. "You up for that, kiddo?" Maisie nodded. Evie smiled softly. "Can I help? I make a mean apple cinnamon flapjack. At least I used to." Cal hesitated, letting people into the kitchen, into routines, into anything hadn't been part of his world for a long time. But something in the way Maisie looked at Evie made him say, "Just don't lift anything heavy." Later that morning, the scent of apples and vanilla filled the kitchen, mingling with the sharp tang of fall air drifting through a cracked window. Maisie had taken charge of stirring the batter, while Evie sat on a stool, peeling apples, with surprising grace for someone in her condition. "Been a while since I cooked," she said, her voice carrying an undertone of something Cal couldn't quite name. "Feels good, though, like muscle memory." He kept his focus on flipping pancakes. "You cooked often." "When I had someone to cook for," she said quietly. Maisie dropped the spoon batter splattering. She giggled, and Evie laughed softly with her. A real laugh, light and fleeting like wind, catching chimes. That laugh stayed with Cal as he stepped out later to chop some wood. He needed air distance perspective, but all he could think about was the way Evie had settled so naturally into their morning, not as an intruder, but like someone who belonged, and just forgot for a while. That afternoon, he found her standing outside near the barn, her hands resting on her back, eyes tilted toward the turning trees. The wind played with her hair, and for a moment she looked like a photograph, warm, beautiful, suspended in time. "You shouldn't be on your feet too much," Cal called, stepping out with a thermos. Evie smiled, catching her breath. "I needed the sky and some sun. It's been a long few days. You came far." She nodded, walked part of it, rode part. "The last ride ended 3 days ago when the truck I was hitching broke down outside the feed store on Route 9. And you just kept walking." Her smile faded. There wasn't much else to do. He handed her the thermos. She took it gratefully. "You're strong," he said. She looked at him. "I used to be softer." Losing someone changes how you carry everything, doesn't it? Cal looked away. "Yeah, it does." That night, after Maisie had fallen asleep in a pile of blankets and stuffed toys, and Ginger had returned to her spot by the hearth, Evie sat by the fire again. The house was quiet, the air filled with the soft pop of burning wood. "I've taken too much of your space," she said suddenly. "I'll leave in the morning." "You've done more than enough." Cal stared at the fire for a long moment before answering. "No. You're staying, as long as you need." She turned toward him, confused. Why he met her eyes steady and certain. "Because someone should have done the same for me and didn't." For a long time, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled, leaves whispered outside. And somewhere in that silence, a new understanding settled between them. Not love, not yet, but something gentler. A kind of peace neither had felt in years. And Cal Weston, for the first time in a long while, didn't feel like something was missing. He felt whole. There were no clocks in the Weston kitchen. Time, there passed by, sound, the crackle of firewood, the creak of floorboards, the gentle clink of coffee mugs on porcelain countertops. That morning, Cal stirred his coffee, not because he needed caffeine, but because the small act gave his hand somewhere to be. Evie sat at the table in silence. She'd braided her hair, a long rope, draped over one shoulder, and wore one of Maisie's oversized sweaters. Sleeves rolled to the elbows. She looked steadier than the day before, but the shadows under her eyes lingered hints of stories she hadn't shared. She was a guest still, but something about her presence no longer felt foreign. Maisie brought a coloring book to the table, dragging her stool closer to Evie without a word. She flipped the pages with small, determined fingers and placed a box of crayons beside her. "Would you color with me?" she asked. Evie looked surprised for a second, then smiled. "I'd love to." Cal watched them quietly, something tightening in his chest. Maisie had always been a quiet child, but since her mother passed, she'd become a shell within a shell. Her laughter had vanished like breath on a mirror, never lingering long enough to remember. But now her tiny voice was reaching out, and it wasn't reaching toward him. He wasn't sure how to feel about that. After breakfast, Cal retreated outside under the pretense of checking the gutters, but mostly to sort the noise in his head. Autumn was in full command now. The wind swept dry leaves into spirals along the porch, and the trees beyond the fields looked like they were on fire with reds, golds, and orange. He stood beneath the sugar maple in the yard, the one Maisie's mother used to hang a swing from. The rope had long since frayed, but the branch remained sturdy. Silent testimony to all that had come before Cal hadn't told Evie much about his past. He didn't need to. She hadn't asked, and he wasn't ready. Not yet. Still, her presence stirred things, like the way she folded kitchen towels the same way Lorna used to, or how she hummed while doing dishes. It wasn't painful. It was gentler than that. It was almost worse. That afternoon, Cal entered the living room and paused. Evie was sitting on the floor, one hand supporting her back, the other showing Maisie how to make paper cranes. Around them were scraps of paper, imperfect folds, and a growing army of lopsided birds. Maisie was giggling, full unguarded giggles. He hadn't heard that sound in nearly 2 years. Maisie looked up. "Dad, look, I made one with only one wing." Evie grinned. "She says it flies in circles." Cal laughed, a short, surprised sound that startled even him. He sat down on the edge of the couch, watching as Evie helped Maisie refold one of the cranes. She was good with children, not in a practiced way, but in a lived way. Like someone who remembered both joy and loss, Cal studied her, wondering not for the first time what had been taken from her. That night, Cal poured 2 mugs of tea instead of 1. He handed one to Evie as they settled by the fireplace. Maisie already tucked in and sleeping soundly upstairs. "I haven't seen her like that since." He didn't finish the sentence. Evie sipped her tea, then set it down, her eyes on the flames. "She's lovely, quiet like you. But there's a softness in her that hasn't been broken. That's rare." "She stopped speaking to strangers after the funeral," Cal said quietly. "Stopped talking at school too. I had to pull her out. We do homeschool now. It's not great, but it's what we've got." Evie nodded. "It's more than a lot of kids have." There was a long silence, comfortable but not empty. Cal found himself wanting to ask questions who Evie had loved, who she'd lost, where she came from, but he bit them back. Prying felt wrong, like poking at a wound, still fresh. Evie saved him the trouble. "I had a daughter." Once she said, her voice soft. Her name was Ruby. She only lived for 3 months. Cal turned to her slowly. She was born early. Breathing issues. The doctors tried everything. We were at the NICU for weeks. I lived in the chair beside her crib. She smiled sadly. "I don't think I ever slept. Just watched. Hoped." She paused, rubbing the swell of her belly, as if in apology to the life inside. "My husband couldn't take it. He left. And when Ruby passed, I guess I left too. Not physically, but everything inside me just shut down." Cal said nothing, but his heart thudded dully in his chest. Evie looked up. "This baby wasn't planned. I was careful. But life, I guess, doesn't always follow the rules. When I found out, I was terrified. Still am. But I want to believe this one's different." Cal's voice was rough. "Maybe this one's the second chance." She smiled. Maybe. The fire crackled between them. Outside, the wind picked up scattering leaves like a blessing or a warning. Inside, silence lingered, but it was no longer the silence of grief. It was the silence of trust, of things unspoken but understood. And Cal Weston, who had long believed there was no healing left in him, realized he was beginning to feel something dangerously close to hope. By the end of the week, the air had shifted again. The sharp scent of chimney smoke curled through the hollows of the Weston farm, and the trees had lost most of their leaves, leaving behind bare silhouettes against a steel-gray sky. Cal noticed the change, not just in the weather, but in the house itself. It was warmer, not just in temperature, but in feeling. Evie moved more slowly now, her belly strained against her borrowed sweater, and she often stopped mid-task to breathe or stretch. Still, she insisted on helping wherever she could, peeling apples, folding laundry, sweeping the porch. She said it helped her feel useful. Cal didn't argue. He understood the need to move to stay ahead of your thoughts. Maisie, meanwhile, had grown attached. Each morning she padded into the kitchen and climbed onto the bench beside Evie without a word. They colored, cooked, and sometimes just sat in silence, sipping tea like 2 old souls who didn't need conversation to connect. That Saturday morning, Evie asked if she could take a walk through the woods behind the house. just the trail she promised. It helps me think. Cal hesitated. It's cold out. I'll bundle up, she said, already, wrapping a scarf around her neck. Besides, I want to see the last of the leaves before they're gone. He didn't argue, but he did wait 10 minutes and then follow her at a quiet distance. The trail behind the Weston house wound through a shallow glen framed by stone fences and gnarled oaks. It was the kind of place that held whispers from the past, carved initials, in bark, forgotten swings, hanging limp from low branches. Evie walked slowly, pausing every few steps, sometimes resting one hand on her lower back. Cal stayed far enough not to disturb her, but close enough to be there if she stumbled. She didn't. Instead, she stopped near a tall sugar maple, its last few golden leaves trembling in the breeze. Cal watched from behind a tree as she reached up and gently pulled one loose from the branch. She studied it for a long time, fingers tracing the veins, eyes soft with thought, before slipping it into her coat pocket like something sacred. Cal looked away, suddenly feeling like a man who had witnessed a prayer. Back at the house, she placed the leaf on the kitchen windowsill. A reminder, she told Maisie, that even when something falls, it can still be beautiful. Maisie nodded solemnly. She reached for another crayon and carefully drew a copy of the leaf in her sketch pad. She handed the drawing to Evie, who looked at it for a long time before folding it gently and tucking it into the same pocket. I'll keep them both, she whispered. Cal, watching from the doorway, felt something knot in his chest. That afternoon, the three of them made apple butter. The kitchen steamed with the scent of cinnamon and clove, and Maisie's cheeks flushed with excitement as she mashed the softened fruit. Evie stirred the pot, slowly humming under her breath. Her voice was soft, almost too soft to hear. But Cal recognized the tune. It was Shenandoah Lorna had loved that song. She used to sing it while washing dishes or brushing Maisie's hair. Cal gripped the edge of the counter, his knuckles white. Evie must have sensed the shift in the air because she turned to him with concern. You okay? He nodded once. Just got something in my eye. She didn't press. Instead, she handed him a wooden spoon, one to stir. And just like that, the moment passed, not erased, but softened. Later that evening, after Maisie had gone to bed, Evie stood by the front window, holding a cup of chamomile tea. Her silhouette was framed by the last golden glow of the day, and her expression was distant. Cal joined her, his own mug in hand. You all right? He asked. She nodded, but didn't look away from the horizon. Do you ever feel, she said slowly, like your life took a detour, and you're not sure if it's leading anywhere at all? Cal didn't answer right away. He knew that feeling too well. Every day, he said, Evie turned to him, eyes searching. Does it get better? He looked at her, really looked, the way she cradled her belly, the way her voice trembled slightly like she didn't believe the question had an answer. It doesn't get easier, he said, honestly. But it gets different, and sometimes that's enough. She smiled faintly, then looked back out the window. Different, I think I could live with that. They stood in silence a while longer. Then Evie said something he didn't expect. I think I'm going to name her. Hope Cal's breath caught. Evie continued. Not because I believe everything will be perfect, but because I want her to know she came from something broken and still brought light. He stared down at his tea steam curling between his fingers. Hope, he said softly. It's a good name. That night, Cal sat at the kitchen table after Evie had gone to bed. He took out a notepad from the drawer, one he hadn't used in years, and started to write. Not a journal entry, not a letter, just words. Things that fall can still be beautiful. Things that break can still hold. Hope is born in quiet places. He didn't know what he was writing toward, but for the first time in years, He didn't feel like he was riding alone. The first crack of thunder came just after noon, low and distant, like the rumble of a truck down a country road. Cal looked up from the fence he was mending and narrowed his eyes at the sky. Heavy slate-colored clouds had been crawling in all morning, but now they gathered with purpose. The air turned still, too still, the kind of stillness that warned of something coming. He set down his hammer and called toward the house. Evie. A moment later, her voice echoed back from the porch. Already bringing in the laundry, Maisie was helping her little arms, struggling to pull down the pins from the flannel sheets that flapped in the wind. Ginger darted across the yard like a streak of orange lightning, clearly not a fan of the coming storm. By the time the first drops began to fall, they were all inside the windows. Shut. The fireplace lit. The wind picked up quickly, moaning through the eaves like something alive. Rain lashed against the glass and sideways sheets. Cal double-checked the cellar door, secured the back entrance, and drew the thickest curtains. Maisie sat on the couch in her pajamas, wrapped in her favorite blanket, her eyes wide but calm. Evie joined her, a book in hand. Cal stood near the fire, arms crossed. I haven't seen a storm rollin' that fast since my days out. West Evie said, you were out of us, Cal. Asked, taking a seat across from her. Couple years in Colorado. Nursing job? Beautiful in the spring, terrifying in the winter. She smiled faintly, much like life. Cal chuckled softly. Sounds about right. The storm showed no sign of stopping. Around 4 in the afternoon, the power flickered once-twice, and then went out completely. Maisie let out a soft gasp. It's okay, Cal said. We've been through worse. He brought out the old oil lamps, the ones he hadn't used since the blizzard of 18. Evie helped light them, her fingers steady despite the howling wind outside. Together, they prepared a simple dinner, grilled cheese over the wood stove and a pot of tomato soup. They ate by the fireplace, the lamplight casting dancing shadows on the walls. It felt like a scene out of an older, slower world. One where time didn't rush, and people remembered how to listen. After dinner, Evie and Maisie built a fort out of blankets and couch cushions. Inside, they read stories by flashlight, their laughter muffled but unmistakably joyful. Cal watched from his armchair, his hands around a mug of lukewarm cider, a strange ache blooming in his chest. He hadn't realized how much he missed the sound of laughter in this house. Later, after Maisie had fallen asleep inside the fort, curled up with Ginger and a stuffed bear, Evie stepped outside the makeshift doorway and sat by the fire. She pulled her sweater tighter around her, but her face glowed with the kind of warmth that came from within. You, okay? Cal asked. Evie nodded. That girl. She's something special, she is, he said. Took a long time before she started smiling again, let alone laughing. You've done a good job, she said. Raising her, I can see that Cal looked down, uncomfortable. Praise didn't sit easily with him. I've done what I could. Evie sipped her tea. The fire crackled between them. I was married once, she said quietly. We were young, thought we had forever. But grief, it changes people. Some break, others bend. My husband broke. I bent until I didn't recognize myself anymore. Cal looked at her, then not out of pity, but respect. I'm sorry, he said. She shrugged. I don't want pity. I just want truth and peace. Maybe that's why I ended up here. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the leaf she'd picked on the trail. It had dried and browned at the edges, but still held its shape. Still beautiful despite the decay. She looked at it. Then I think this place is the most peace I've felt in years. They sat in silence for a while longer. The storm outside raged, but inside everything felt still. Then Evie shifted in her seat, a sudden sharp breath escaping her lips. Cal sat up straight. You okay? She nodded, grimacing. Just a cramp. Probably Braxton Hicks. They've been coming and going all day. He frowned. You sure? Evie breathed slowly, said it for. It's not time yet, just practice. Cal didn't like the sound of that. Not with the roads flooded and the phone lines down. Still, he said. Rising, I'm going to set up the downstairs room for you tonight, just in case. You shouldn't be climbing stairs, Evie smiled. Thank you. As Cal gathered fresh linens, he thought about the girl sleeping in the fort, the woman breathing through another tightening pain by the fire, and the wind still clawing at the corners of the house. Something inside him whispered, "Be ready." That night, Cal couldn't sleep. He sat in the kitchen listening to the tick of the old clock on the wall. The storm had passed its peak, but it hadn't let go. The trees still moaned, the gutters overflowed, but inside all was still. Then, just past midnight, a soft knock. He opened the door to find Evie, her face pale, her hands gripping the doorway. "They're not practice anymore," she whispered. "It's happening." Cal had never delivered a baby. He'd braved ambushes in Afghanistan, dug his truck out of snowdrifts taller than Maisie, and once stitched his own leg shut after slicing it open on a barbed wire fence. But none of that compared to the feeling that gripped him as he stood face to face with Evie Lane, hands clenched on the doorframe, and her voice trembling with 5 simple words. "It's happening. She's coming now." The storm outside had eased to a persistent drizzle, but the roads were still rivers, and the power had yet to return. No phone, no ambulance, just Cal. Weston, a woman in labor, and a daughter, asleep in a blanket fort, dreaming in the warmth of flickering firelight. He took a breath he didn't feel and nodded. "Okay, come sit, we'll figure it out." The next hour passed in blurs. Evie tried to hide her pain biting down on cloth, her knuckles white as she clutched the arms of the couch Cal read from a tattered copy of an emergency birthing guide that he found in the pantry. Why it was there, he had no idea, but he took it as grace. He boiled water, gathered clean towels, and turned up the heater. Evie refused to lie down at first, pacing, breathing, whispering things under her breath that sounded like prayers or apologies. And through it all, she never once asked him to leave. That part stuck with him. "Okay, Evie," he said, kneeling beside her when the contractions quickened. "I know I'm not a doctor, but I need you to listen to my voice and trust me." She looked down at him, sweat beating at her temples, eyes sharp with fear and fierce with love. "You're doing fine, Cal. Just don't pass out on me." He cracked a smile. "Can't. No backup here." The birth was raw and holy. Evie's cries filled the room as she pushed her body, trembling tears streaming from exhaustion and pain. Cal held her hand, anchoring her through the storm still raging within her. Then just as the clock struck 2 to 17, the child arrived into the world with a gasp and a wail, lungs announcing life to the rafters. A girl, tiny, red-faced, alive. Cal wrapped her in a soft flannel towel, his hands trembling. He couldn't speak, could barely breathe. Evie sobbed, arms reaching. When he placed the baby in her embrace, Evie cradled her close and whispered through tears, "You're here. You're safe. Hope, welcome home." Cal stepped outside onto the porch, the rain now a whisper, the sky breaking open with the earliest touch of dawn. He braced both hands on the railing and exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for years. Behind him inside that little farmhouse, a baby was crying, alive. Healthy born, not just into the world, but into a family. He looked out at the trees, their bare limbs reaching upward, silhouetted against a deep blue sky. It was the first time in years he didn't feel alone out there. By morning, Maisie had awakened to find the world changed. She padded into the living room in her pajamas, her stuffed rabbit in one hand, the other rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Daddy," she whispered. Cal knelt to her level and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "There's someone I want you to meet." Evie sat propped on the couch, pale but radiant, a bundle in her arms, wrapped in the same blanket Maisie had once been swaddled in. Maisie stepped forward, slowly, eyes wide. "This is Hope," Evie said softly. Maisie looked up at her father, then back at the baby. "She's little." "She is," Cal said. But strong as he reached out and touched the baby's fingers. "Can I be her big sister?" Evie's breath hitched. Cal didn't answer with words. He simply pulled Maisie into his arms and kissed the top of her head. They didn't go anywhere that day. No errands, no chores. Instead, Cal cooked a quiet breakfast eggs toast and the last of the jam Evie had helped him make 2 weeks earlier. He brewed a pot of tea strong enough to wake the dead and placed 3 plates on the table. 3, it was the first time he'd done that in years. Evie shuffled in slowly, baby cradled to her chest, and sat beside Maisie. They ate together in soft conversation full of smiles and silences, and the unspoken awe that they were all still here together. "I know it's not much of a Thanksgiving," Cal said, glancing at the calendar. "No turkey, no pumpkin pie." Evie reached over and touched his wrist. "It's perfect," she said. After the meal, while the baby slept, Maisie handed Cal a crayon drawing. It showed a tree with yellow leaves, a house with smoke curling from the chimney, and 3 stick figures holding hands. One was tall with a beard. One had a big round belly. The third had pigtails. Underneath in large, blocky letters she'd written, "My family." Cal stared at it for a long time. His voice caught when he finally said, "You forgot the cat." Maisie giggled. "She's in the window." Sure enough, there was a tiny orange blob in a square box above the house. Evie looked at him and smiled. And in that smile, Cal saw everything he hadn't dared hope for: healing warmth, the possibility of another kind of life. One not haunted by what had been lost, but full of what could still be found. That evening, when the power finally flickered back on, and the radio resumed its low hum, Cal stood at the sink, washing dishes, listening to Evie hum a lullaby to the baby in the next room. He didn't recognize the song, but he knew the feeling. It was home. The following week arrived gently, like a hush falling over the hills after a hymn. The storm had passed, but its echoes lingered in puddles pooled along the dirt road in the broken fence post. Cal hadn't yet repaired, and in the way, he paused more often now to listen to the fire crackling to Hope's quiet breathing, to the sound of Evie humming lullabies in the early morning light. Inside the farmhouse, life had taken on a slower rhythm. Not heavy, not sad, simply full. Every hour was spoken for feeding, changing, resting, soothing. Evie spent most of her time in the rocking chair beside the window. Hope pressed against her chest. Maisie often curled at her feet with a book or toy, like a tiny sentry. Cal moved through the house differently, now quieter, gentler, as if afraid to disturb the spell that had settled around them. He still rose early, still chopped wood, still mended what needed fixing. But he found himself stopping more often to look at Evie, at Hope, at Maisie's drawings, tacked to the refrigerator door. There was something in him that had gone quiet for years, now beginning to stir. One night, as the sun disappeared behind the ridge and the sky turned lavender with cold, Cal lit the fireplace and brought in tea. Maisie had already fallen asleep in Evie's lap, her thumb curled near her lip like she used to when she was little. Evie looked down at her, then up at Cal. Her eyes were tired, but soft. "She loves you," she whispered. "That's not always a given between a child and a parent. But Maisie, She adores you." Cal settled into the armchair. "I'm just doing what I can." Evie looked at him long and quiet. "It's more than that," she said. "There's something about the way she watches you, like she knows you've given up pieces of yourself to keep her whole." Her words fell like kindling in his chest, catching slowly. Cal didn't respond right away. Instead, he stared at the fire, letting its warmth seep into his hands. "My wife used to say, 'I loved through action,'" he said it finally. "Fixing things, protecting people, being still. That's harder for me." Evie smiled faintly. "You've been still with me." He looked at her, surprised. "I noticed," she said. Later that evening, Evie stood by the window while Cal cleaned up the kitchen. Hope was asleep in the bassinet, Maisie tucked in upstairs. The moon was high clear and white, casting shadows through the lace curtain. Evie wrapped her arms around herself, as though bracing against a cold that had nothing to do with the weather. "I used to dream about a house like this," she said. "A porch, a maple tree, a kitchen where people talked instead of yelled." Cal dried his hands and leaned against the doorway. "I used to dream about being alone," he admitted. Evie turned to him, surprised. He shrugged. "After Lorna died, people kept stopping by, dropping off casseroles, asking if I was okay. And I appreciated it, I really did. But every knock on the door just reminded me she wasn't the one answering it." He paused. I think I thought, if I closed the door long enough, grief would leave me alone." Evie's voice softened. "Did it?" "No," Cal said. "It just got quiet, like it was waiting for me to open back up so it could walk right in." She nodded slowly. "I get that." Then something shifted in her face. A tremor. She turned back toward the window. "I haven't cried since the day Ruby died," she whispered. Cal's chest tightened. "Evie, not even when I found out I was pregnant again. Not when I lost my job or my apartment. Not when I had to walk through the night just to find shelter." She shook her head, arms still wrapped around herself. "But just now, while I was rocking, Maisie, I felt it, like something cracked." She turned toward him, and this time her eyes were full. Not just with tears, but with the weight of everything she'd carried alone. "I'm tired of being strong," she said. Cal crossed the room slowly, deliberately, and stopped just short of touching her. "You don't have to be," he said gently. "Not here." Evie stood frozen for a heartbeat, then took one step forward and let herself fold into him. And finally, she cried. Long, silent sobs that racked through her, as if they'd waited years for permission. Cal didn't speak. He didn't offer platitudes or solutions. He just held her, the way you hold something that's both breaking and healing at once. The next morning, Cal found her in the garden, standing beneath the bare maple tree, Hope bundled in her arms. Her face was calm, her eyes steady. "I think I slept for the first time in a month," she said. He smiled. The crying helped. She chuckled. "I think you're right." He walked toward her slowly. "You okay?" "I am," she said. "For the first time in a long while, I really am." And then, almost shyly, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded slip of paper. It was one of Maisie's drawings, one Cal hadn't seen. It showed a tall man, a little girl, a baby in a woman's arms, and a tree overhead dropping golden leaves. She held it out to him. "I kept this," she said, "because I think maybe this is what healing looks like. Not flashy, not perfect, just slow and real." Cal took the paper with careful hands. He looked at her, then at Hope, then toward the house behind them. The wind whispered through the maple's bare branches, and for the first time he whispered back. The days began to shorten, as they always did this time of year. By 4 in the afternoon, long shadows stretched across the farmhouse, like quiet reminders winter was coming. Inside, though, it was always warm now, Not just from the fire Cal faithfully kept burning, but from the life that had begun to pulse in every room. Hope was 2 weeks old. She slept, often cried, seldom, and had a way of watching people, especially Cal, with unnerving intensity. Her eyes were the color of late autumn sky, pale, shifting, always searching. Maisie insisted Hope had inherited Cal's eyes. Cal had laughed when she first said it, brushing her off with a playful shake of the head. Not biologically possible, kiddo. But that night, when he held Hope under the soft lamp glow in the nursery Evie and Maisie had set up together, he looked into those curious, quiet eyes and felt something tighten in his chest. Maybe it wasn't blood that made a child yours. Maybe it was the moment she trusted you enough to fall asleep in your arms. Evie was healing slowly. Her body ached more than she let on, and Cal noticed she still winced when rising from the rocking chair. But her color had returned. Her voice steadied, and there was light in her laughter. Now, one afternoon, she stood at the kitchen counter, rolling dough for biscuits. Sleeves dusted in flour, her hair tied up in a loose knot. Cal entered the room and stopped short, struck by the familiarity of the moment. It wasn't déjà vu. It was memory. Lorna used to do the same thing standing in that same spot, sunlight on her hands. But where memory once felt like grief, now it just felt gentle. Evie noticed him watching. What she asked, smiling, he shook his head. Nothing, just, it's good to see the kitchen alive again. She held his gaze for a second longer than usual. Then she said, I want to plant lavender in the spring, just outside the window. Cal blinked. Lorna loved lavender. Evie smiled faintly. I know Maisie told me. He nodded, surprised. It'd be good to have it back. Something passed between them, unspoken but understood. That evening, Cal sat in the barn workshop, sanding a cradle he'd begun working on the day after Hope was born. It was slow work. He wasn't a carpenter, but his hands were steady, and each curve of wood gave him something quiet to focus on. Maisie entered carrying a mug of cocoa. For you, she said, handing it over. Evie said, not to let it go cold. He took it with a grateful nod. Thanks, Peanut. She looked at the half-finished cradle, then at him. Are you going to give it to Hope? Cal smiled. That's the plan. She hesitated, then asked, did you make one for me? The question surprised him. He set down the mug. No, he said gently. I wasn't very handy back then. Your mom bought one secondhand from a neighbor, painted it yellow. You used to kick the side until paint chipped? Maisie grinned. Sounds like me. Cal chuckled. She leaned against his knee. I think Hope's lucky. She got you when you're better at being a dad. The words hit harder than she knew. Cal reached out and pulled her into a hug. I wasn't perfect back then, he said softly. I'm still not. But I'm trying, Maisie nodded. You're doing good now. The next morning, Evie woke to the smell of cinnamon and butter. She came down the stairs, robe loosely tied, hair still tousled, to find Cal in the kitchen, wearing an apron that said, Grill Sergeant, and Maisie, at the table with whipped cream on her nose. Morning, Evie said, laughing. Cal gestured to the plate. Pumpkin pancakes. Maisie's idea. Hope was in her bouncer chair nearby. Gurgling, Evie sat, and Maisie proudly poured syrup for her today's special. She said, Why's that? Evie asked. Amused. Because it's Tuesday, Maisie replied as though it were obvious. Evie burst out laughing. They ate together, light pouring in through the windows. It was a simple meal, but to Cal, it felt like a celebration. Later that day, while Maisie was outside helping Ginger hunt fallen leaves, and Hope napped peacefully, Cal and Evie found themselves alone on the porch swing. The late autumn breeze rustled through the empty branches. Evie held a mug of chamomile. Cal just sat his arm along the back of the swing, close but not quite touching her. Evie looked out toward the tree line. "I don't know where I'd be if I hadn't found your barn," she said. He glanced sideways. "You make it sound like it was luck, wasn't it?" He shook his head. "No, it was something else, something I'd stopped believing in." Evie looked at him, and what was that? He turned toward her, slow and steady grace. She didn't respond right away, but when she finally did, her voice was soft. "That makes two of us." She reached for his hand, then not out of impulse but invitation. And Cal Weston, who had spent years building walls no one could see, let one of them fall. He laced his fingers through hers. The wind picked up slightly, carrying the faint scent of earth and chimney smoke. Somewhere in the distance, Maisie shouted a laugh that echoed off the barn. Hope stirred, but didn't cry. Evie leaned her head against his shoulder, and the man who thought he'd used up every second chance was quiet, with wonder at how wrong he'd been. The first snow arrived early that year, soft and hesitant, like it wasn't sure it was welcome. It dusted the porch railing and settled between the last fallen leaves, fragile as lace. Cal stood by the window, watching it drift silently across the field. The kind of quiet that winter brought wasn't just stillness, it was invitation. To remember. To reflect. Evie came into the room with Hope bundled against her chest, the baby's tiny hands tucked beneath her chin. "She's finally asleep," she whispered, smiling. Cal turned. "That's a miracle." Evie laughed under her breath and crossed to the rocker near the fire. "She fought it for over an hour. She gets that from you?" That earned him a sideways glance. "Excuse me," he grinned and held up both hands. "Just an observation." The house was warm, scented with pine from the logs Cal had chopped 2 days earlier. Outside, the sun dipped low behind the ridge, casting everything in gold. Inside, it felt timeless. Suspended, and Cal felt it again, that quiet voice inside him that had been getting louder lately. This isn't just temporary. He wasn't sure when that thought first crept in. Maybe the night Hope was born. Maybe the morning Evie had touched his wrist at the table. But now it echoed in every moment. In Maisie's laughter, in Evie's touch, in the way this house no longer felt like a shrine to what he'd lost, but a cradle for what he'd found. Still, there was one thing left undone. One story unspoken. That night, after the girls had gone to bed, and the wind began to whistle through the chimney flue, Cal made his way up the attic stairs. He hadn't been up there in nearly a year. Dust clung to everything, the old trunks, the cedar chest, the boxes of baby clothes Lorna had insisted on saving, just in case. He knelt beside a small metal tin labeled letters, wiped the lid clean, and opened it. Inside, among the birthday cards and scribbled notes from years ago, was a single envelope, unsealed, unsent. The paper had yellowed slightly, but the handwriting was still unmistakably hers. Lorna's. He unfolded it carefully, hands shaking more than he wanted to admit. "Cal, if you're reading this, it means I've gone. And I hate that. I hate that. Maisie won't have me at her side. And I hate that you'll be left with too many things unsaid. So here's the one thing I don't want to leave unsaid. Don't stop living. Don't turn this house into a museum of what we had. I want Maisie to grow up with music in the kitchen, with laughter, with Sunday pancakes and muddy boots, and someone else sitting across from you at the table. You don't owe me your grief, but you do owe Maisie your heart. All of it. If you ever find someone who looks at her like she's magic, don't you dare let them go. And if you find someone who can love you the way you deserve, let them. Please, Cal, let them. Always Lorna. He read it 3 times, the 4th time he cried, not the aching, gut-wrenching sobs he'd let himself feel the night she died, not the silent tears of the months that followed. These were different. These were tears of permission. The next morning, the sun rose bright against the white fields, turning the world to gold. Evie was feeding Hope near the window, while Maisie sat at the kitchen table, drawing another picture. This time of a snow-covered cabin, with smoke rising gently from the chimney. Cal placed the letter in front of Evie. "What's this?" she asked softly. "Something I should have read a long time ago." She unfolded the page and read silently. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't speak. When she looked up at him, her expression held both wonder and hesitation. "Why now?" Cal stepped forward, pulling out the chair across from her. "Because I was afraid," he said honestly. "Afraid that letting go of what I had meant losing her completely. But I see now, Lorna never wanted to be a wall between me and the rest of my life. She wanted to be a bridge." Evie covered her mouth with one hand. Cal reached across the table and laid his palm on hers. "I don't know where this is going," he said. "But I know this house feels more like home with you in it. And I know Maisie has started drawing pictures again. That hope calms when you hold her. That I look forward to every sunrise just to hear your voice." A long silence fell between them. Then Evie said, voice quiet and steady, "I didn't come here looking for this, I know. But I think she continued somewhere deep down. I was hoping." They both smiled. And in that moment, Cal Weston understood something he hadn't dared believe for years. Hope wasn't just a name. It was a person, a promise, a beginning. That night, he stood at the kitchen counter writing on a new sheet of paper. Not a letter, this time. Just a few lines, for himself, for her. "You were right. There's music again. There's laughter. And yes, someone else sits across from me now. Thank you for loving me enough to let me go." He folded it gently, slid it into the tin upstairs, and closed the lid. Then he went back downstairs, where the fire burned and the baby stirred, and someone he never expected to find was waiting for him. The last leaves had long since fallen, but the memory of their color still lingered like a warmth in the bones. The air was crisp, now edged with the scent of smoke and soil and something sweet. Evie had baked earlier that morning. Snow hadn't come yet, but the sky hinted at its nearness. Cal stood at the edge of the pasture eyes on the maple tree that had stood watch over his life for as long as he could remember. Its limbs were bare but strong, like something that had endured every season and still chose to remain rooted. Maisie ran up to him, her cheeks pink with cold, a folded paper in her hand. "Can we do it under the tree?" she asked breathlessly. Cal looked down, a smile forming. "The ceremony," she nodded. "It's where we found the first red leaf, the one Evie kept. I think that's special." He crouched beside her. "Yeah, kiddo. That sounds just right." The ceremony was small, just the three of them, and Hope. Of course, no guests, no photographer, no flowers except for the handful. Maisie picked from the last blooming lavender stalks Evie had coaxed into the window box. Evie wore a soft, cream-colored dress, simple, warm, with a shawl that had once belonged to Cal's mother. Her hair was braided over one shoulder, and she held Hope close in a sling against her chest. The baby slept the whole time, as if she somehow knew this was a moment not to be disturbed. Cal wore a clean flannel shirt, his only tie, and the kind of look in his eyes that made Evie's breath catch. No one officiated. They didn't need it. They stood beneath the bare maple hands, clasped Maisie between them, holding both palms wide and solemn like a little bridge. Cal cleared his throat, looked at Evie, and spoke quietly. "I don't have vows written," he said, "but I do have a truth. I thought my life was over. And then you walked into my barn with nothing but a suitcase and a baby growing inside you. You needed shelter, and I needed saving. Turns out we gave each other both. Evie's eyes shimmered. She took a breath. I was running, she said. From grief, from shame. From everything I'd failed at. I didn't come here to be loved. But that's exactly what I found. In Maisie, in you, in this house, that somehow brought me back to life. They paused, the breeze teasing the edge of her shawl. Maisie cleared her throat and held up a folded paper. I wrote something too. They smiled and bent slightly to hear her. She unfolded it carefully. I think a family is not when people look alike. It's when people look out for each other. I think this is my family, and I think it's forever. Evie bent down and kissed the top of her head, whispering, "You made this day perfect." Maisie smiled proudly. I practiced reading it 10 times. They didn't exchange rings, just a promise sealed with a quiet kiss beneath the tree, as the wind carried the last of autumn's breath across the field. Later, back inside the house, they lit candles, turned on old music from the record player Cal had kept in storage, and danced slowly in the living room. Maisie danced too, spinning in circles until she collapsed in giggles on the rug. Evie watched Cal hold Hope in his arms, swaying gently to the music, as if she were made of glass and prayer. "I've never seen you look so at peace," she said. Cal smiled, adjusting the baby's head against his chest. I think Peace is her middle name. Evie laughed. "Hope, Peace. Weston. Sounds like she belongs in a folk band," he chuckled. "Give it 10 years. She'll be playing banjo on the porch." She moved to his side, their shoulders, touching eyes, fixed on the tiny girl whose breath was warm against his flannel. "She has your calm," Evie said, "but she dreams with her fists curled like she's ready to fight for something. She already won," he said softly. "She made us a family." That night after Maisie had gone to bed, and Hope was sleeping in the cradle Cal had finished sanding just the day before, Evie and Cal sat by the fire, hands wrapped around matching mugs. There were no more things left unsaid, no more waiting. I was afraid this would feel like replacing her, Cal said suddenly. Evie looked at him surprised. "Lorna," he clarified. Evie nodded, giving him space. "But it doesn't," he continued. "You're not here instead of her. You're here because of her, because she gave me enough love to survive losing her, and that made space for something new." Evie's eyes filled. She reached for his hand. "Then maybe I'll write her a letter one day to say thank you." Cal's throat tightened. I think she'd like that. They sat like that for a long while, hands clasped, fire crackling a life newly begun but already full. Outside, the stars hung low, bright against the black. The wind had quieted. The house, for the first time in years, felt not just inhabited, but alive. Inside, on the mantel, 3 stockings had been hung. Maisie, Evie, Hope, and one more stitched from an old flannel shirt bearing the name Dad. It snowed the morning of Christmas Eve. Not a storm, not a flurry, just a quiet, steady snowfall that softened everything it touched. The fields behind the Weston farmhouse lay blanketed in white, untouched except for a single set of tracks, Maisie's boots leading to the maple tree and back. She'd gone out early, bundled in layers, to hang 3 pine cone ornaments from its lowest branch. Evie stood at the window, holding Hope, now a month old, bundled in a knitted hat and fleece onesie. Her cheeks were rounder, her eyes more alert, her fists no longer curled tight, but opened. Often, searching, reaching, resting. "Do you think she knows it's Christmas?" Evie asked, smiling down at her. Cal came up behind them, placing a hand gently on Evie's shoulder. "She knows she's loved." "That's enough." Evie leaned into him. Maisie ran back into the house, her nose red, her hands full of snow. "I built a snow bunny," she declared. Cal laughed. "How does it look? Like a potato with ears?" she said proudly. That afternoon, Cal chopped wood, While Maisie helped Evie bake gingerbread cookies, the kitchen smelled of cloves, sugar, and warmth. Music played softly from the old record player, Bing Crosby and Nat King Cole, taking turns serenading the house. Evie rolled dough slowly, her body still tired easily, but her strength was returning. She watched Maisie press cookie cutters into the dough, with such focus, her tongue poking out between her lips. "You're a good big sister," Evie said. Maisie looked up. "I want to teach Hope to draw." "She'll love that," Maisie hesitated. "And maybe we can tell her about your first baby." "About Ruby," Evie paused, her breath catching. Maisie looked nervous. "I just think she should know she had a sister." Even if just for a little while, Evie bent down, cupping Maisie's face. "That is the kindest thing anyone's ever said to me," Maisie beamed, then proudly declared, "I'll draw them together, Hope and Ruby under the maple tree." Evie nodded, blinking back tears. "That would be beautiful." That night, the house was quiet. Hope had finally drifted off to sleep. The cookies were cooling. Cal and Evie stood on the porch, watching snowflakes spin in the porch light like stars falling in slow motion. Evie pulled her coat tighter. "You ever pray?" she asked Cal. Exhaled slow. "I used to, before Lorna got sick. After that, I didn't see the point." Evie nodded. "Me too. I stopped when Ruby died." Figured no one was listening. They stood in silence for a moment, breath turning to mist. "Funny thing," she added, "I started again." "A few weeks ago," Cal looked at her. "I don't ask for anything," she said softly. "I just say, thank you." "For what?" She smiled. "For this, for being here, for warmth, for Maisie's drawings, for your steady hands, for the way you hold her like she's your own." She turned to him. "For giving me back my name, Evie. Not just a runaway or a burden or someone trying to survive. You saw me, and that saved me." Cal swallowed hard. "You saved me too." He pulled her closer, their foreheads resting together under the soft hush of falling snow. "And I think," she whispered, "Hope feels it too." Inside by the fire, Cal sat with Hope sleeping against his chest, and Maisie nestled under his arm, her head resting on his side. Evie returned from the kitchen with 3 mugs of cider, 2 full, 1 only a quarter filled. "What's this one for?" Cal asked. Pointing, Evie smiled. For her, she set the smallest mug on the mantel beside the photo of Lorna, beside a vase of lavender and a folded letter Cal had left open months ago. Maisie looked up. "Do you think Mom knows?" Cal nodded slowly. "Yeah, kiddo, I think she does." They sat together, the glow of the fire warming the room. No one asked for anything that night. No one needed to. It was enough to be there together, whole in the way only broken people could be when they'd learned how to love again. The next morning, just as dawn broke and the world outside turned golden beneath the snow, Cal stepped out onto the porch alone. He didn't bring a list, didn't speak aloud. He just looked up at the sky, hand over his heart, and whispered, "Thank you." No request, no plea, just a prayer without asking. We'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from today? It warms our hearts to see this little corner of kindness reaching so many places. If this story spoke to you, we invite you gently to subscribe to our channel, where love, hope, and humanity are always at the heart of every tale. Thank you truly for spending part of your day with us. Your presence here means more than you know.